If you're wanting to make a heartfelt handmade Valentine's gift this year, then look no further, I think I can help you out. Hi, my name's Han, I'm a hand embroidery artist and I have some beginner friendly hand embroidery tutorials for you. In this video, I'll be showing you how to embroider some custom anniversary date hoodies, some Valentine's Day themed shoes, and the most perfect pair of custom floral embroidered jeans. The first tutorial I'll be taking you through is for these custom anniversary date hoodies. So the first step I took was finding a website to generate the date into Roman numerals for me. And after I switched the date into Roman numerals, I went into Canva to create a printable version of exactly what I want to embroider onto the hoodies. Canva is great for little projects like this, and it makes it really easy to scale the design to exactly the size that you want it to be. So I wanted to add the date in Roman numerals as well as an initial and a heart on the inside of one of the sleeves. I'm not printing that onto regular paper, I am using fabric solvy paper, and it's really important to note that if you do want to use this kind of paper, you're going to have a special kind of printer. I have a HP inkjet printer. I will have all of the supplies that I use in this video linked in the description below, including the paper and the hoodies that I'll be using today. But you could also use a different technique such as drawing out the date or whatever design that you want onto the hoodies in an erasable embroidery marker. I'll have one of those linked in the description as well. So once I have the date and the little initials printed out, I'm going to go ahead and cut them out and stick them to the hoodie. You'll also need a embroidery hoop for this project, and I should also note that it's not essential that you use this fabric solvy paper method. I just find that it adds a little bit of stability to the fabric when you're embroidering, and it makes the project easier in general, in my opinion. Once you have the hoop and the sticker in place, it's time to start stitching. I'm going to be using 4 strands of a dark green thread to match the other hoodie, and then on the other hoodie I'm going to be using a white thread to match this hoodie, just so they're nice and matchy. I'm using 4 strands of thread, and I'm just going to be doing really simple straight stitches. Since the Roman numerals are really easy to stitch, it's just back and forth straight stitches. I'm going to show you the entire process from start to finish on this hoodie with no cuts or anything. My head does get in the way in some of these clips, please excuse my extremely messy bun. I'm quite short-sighted, so I sometimes get quite close to the embroidery, but I think you should still be able to see exactly how I do all of the stitches and how I complete this project. This is a really beginner-friendly project because the stitches are super simple and easy to follow. A couple of tips that might make this easier to complete is to make sure that when you put your hoop onto the hoodie, make sure that the fabric is nice and taut and tight inside the hoop. This is going to make the project much neater and the finished product look much tidier. Don't worry if your sticker lifts a little bit, especially on the initial stitches. Just keep patting it down, and then once you have a couple of stitches in it, it's going to stay in place. But it's okay if the paper puckers a little bit and moves around a tiny bit, it's not a big deal. We are going to be removing the paper later on, so it doesn't have to look neat or tidy. Since I am using 4 strands of thread, I don't have to make too many stitches for each of the lines on the Roman numerals. I do about 2 or 3 for each individual stroke. And also don't forget the little periods that separate each of the dates. Once you're finished with the last digit, you're going to go ahead and secure the stitches on the inside of the hoodie. I like to do this by weaving my needle through some of the inside stitches quite a few times and then making quite a few knots. I probably weave it inside the stitches 4 or 5 times and then I make 3 or 4 knots. This is going to make sure that your stitches are really secure, especially since you'll probably be machine washing this. We want to make sure the stitches don't come loose or go anywhere. Then snip off your excess thread and remove the hoop. You should be left with something like this. And then we're going to move on to the stitching on the inside of the sleeve. We're just adding an initial and a heart on the inside of the sleeve, so it's going to be a much shorter process than the entire Roman numeral date. Use exactly the same method with this, just going back and forth with straight stitches. And then to fill the heart, we're also just going to be using straight stitches. Could also call these back stitches, I guess, just in a cluster. And then once you're done with this, we're going to be using the same technique to tie off and secure the thread. You should have something like this once you're done with the inside of the sleeve. Now it's time to remove the fabric solvy sticky paper. This is much easier when it's done under a sink. I was just trying to make this more aesthetic for the video, so I have a little bowl of water, but if you're doing this at home, it's so much easier to just run it under some running water under a faucet. Once the fabric solvy paper comes into contact with water, it starts to dissolve, and I find it easier sometimes to just peel it as it's dissolving, but you can just leave it in the water and it will dissolve dissolve and come off on its own. You might have to scrub it a little bit with a finger, but you shouldn't have to work too hard to get it off the fabric. This process can take 10 to 15 minutes for the sticky paper to dissolve completely, so don't worry if it's being a little bit stubborn, just leave it in a little bit of water and it will disappear. After I was done with this hoodie, I went ahead and did the other hoodie off camera, since it was exactly the same process, just in some different color thread on a different colored hoodie. And these are the final results. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. In my opinion, this is one of the easiest, most beginner friendly embroidery projects that you could try at home, and the finished products are so cute. I'm actually wearing mine right now as I record this voiceover. Thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you've gotten to the end. If you found this tutorial helpful, please leave me a like and maybe let me know in the comments if you're going to try this project at home. In this next tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to embroider these Valentine's Day themed Converse. This is going to be a beginner-friendly tutorial on how to stitch hearts onto a pair of canvas sneakers. You don't need to have any embroidery experience to complete this project. Even if you've never touched a needle and thread before, I promise you, you will be able to complete this embroidery project. With Valentine's Day coming up, these would be the perfect gift for the special someone in your life, or you could just make them for yourself as well. It's always nice to treat yourself, especially around Valentine's Day. So let's hop right into the supplies you're going to need to complete this project. Firstly, you'll need embroidery needles. Honestly, any kind of embroidery needle will do. The longer the needle, the slightly easier the project will be, because sometimes it's kind of hard to fit your hand inside the shoe and pull the needle through. The next thing you'll need is some thread, obviously in the color that you want to embroider the hearts in. I'm using some DMC number 326 thread. And then next you will need some kind of pen or pencil to draw the hearts onto the shoes as a rough guide. You could use this disappearing embroidery marker, or you could just go in with a really fine line pencil. I chose to just go in with the pencil since the stitches will be covering the marks that I make, but the pen is also a great option because the blue end disappears when it comes into contact with water. The most important thing you'll need are some finger protectors. I like to wear these on my index and my middle finger. It gives you a little extra grip when pulling the needle through the shoes, and it also protects the skin on your fingertips. You'll also need some small sharp scissors. Honestly, you could just use any pair of scissors, but I find the smaller and the sharper they are, the quicker and the easier the project is to complete. And lastly, you're going to need a pair of shoes. I'm using these Converse All-Star Lift platforms. They're kind of a salmony pink color, and I got a little bit carried away when I was filming this. I made the heart marks on the shoes before I filmed it, but I'll go back in and show you when to do that process as well. All of the supplies that I just went through will be linked in the description of this video in case you want to pick some of those up for this project or any future embroidery projects. So the first thing we're going to do is unlace the shoes. If this is your first shoe embroidery project, I do recommend completely unlacing them, taking the laces out of all the eyelets and then just setting them aside, and then relacing the shoes once you're done embroidering. There's nothing worse than accidentally embroidering through a lace. You're going to see here I'm a little bit lazy and I tend to just tuck them out of the way. Another thing you're going to want to tuck away is the tongue of the shoe. This is also really easy to accidentally embroider onto, so you want to get that out of the way as much as you possibly can. I like to just tuck it underneath the toe cap of the shoe, and then here you'll see I just tuck the laces off to the side, but it can also still be easy to accidentally embroider onto them this way, so just unlace your shoes just to be safe. Next, I cut myself about 40 centimeters of embroidery thread, and then I'm going to take that thread and split it into 3 strands. So embroidery skeins usually come in a density of 6 smaller strands, all woven together into one larger strand. To get more delicate and precise stitches, a lot of embroidery artists will section this thread off into smaller segments, which is what you can see me doing here. This might take you a couple of tries, and it's not uncommon for the thread to knot a little bit and just act up, so don't worry if this takes you a little bit longer than it's taking me here on camera. And then as you can see, once I have that split off into 2 sections of 3, I'm going to set one of them aside, and then I'm going to thread the other section into my needle. Now for this project, I wanted the hearts to look a little bit 3D, a little bit puffy, so instead of just embroidering them with this 3 strands of thread, I'm going to actually double it up and knot it at the bottom. The area of thread that actually travels through the shoe is half as dense as it would be if I just went ahead and threaded the 6 strands without splitting it. I hope that makes sense. So once I'm done threading my needle and knotting the bottom of my thread, I'm going to go in and go over those little shapes I marked out earlier when I got too excited and did this off camera. You might be thinking to yourself, those don't really look like hearts, those just look like the letter V, and you would be right. We're just going to be overlapping our stitches over these markers, and they'll end up looking more like hearts than letter V's, I promise. So let's move on to the stitching part of this tutorial. You're going to start at the top of your first heart. It doesn't matter which heart you start on, and it doesn't matter which side of the heart that you start stitching on. I just find it important that you stitch from the top to the bottom. It just makes the process a little bit easier. And what we're going to do is satin stitches. We're going to do 3 satin stitches on each side of the heart, and we're going to alternate the sides. So we're going to do one satin stitch on the right, one satin stitch on the left, then back to the right, one satin stitch on the right, one satin stitch on the left, and then do that one more time until you've made 6 satin stitches for each heart. I find that this is the perfect amount of stitches, the perfect amount of thread, and the hearts turn out perfectly every time. Just make sure when you are stitching around a circle like this to move in either a clockwise or an anti-clockwise direction, and to stitch the heart right next to the heart that you just stitched. You don't want to be going from a heart at the very top of the circle to a heart right at the bottom and then like zigzagging about. That's going to end up in a lot of extra thread on the inside of your shoes, so just keep it tidy and go from one heart to the one next to it to the one next to it. If your thread starts to knot a little bit, don't worry about it. Don't pull your thread too hard. You might end up breaking the thread, or you might just end up making an even worse knot. Find the source of the knot and pull away from the direction you were stitching in. This will usually loosen it up and you'll be able to keep stitching as if nothing happened. So tying off your thread and securing it inside of the shoe is a really important step. I'm just rolling down the sides of the shoe here so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. I like to thread my needle inside some of the inner stitches 2 or 3 times, and then I do that again 2 or 3 times, but on those 2 or 3 times I make knots in those loops. This is a tried and true method. I've never had stitches come loose. I've been embroidering shoes for about 7 years now, and a lot of people always ask, do you need any backing on the inside of the shoes? You don't. You usually can't feel the stitches if you've done them nice and neatly, and embroidery thread is much hardier than it looks. It's not going anywhere. It will outlast the shoes themselves most of the time. The process for the outside of the shoes is exactly the same. I'm just going to show you a couple of clips here to keep this video nice and short and sweet, and you should be left with something like this once you are finished stitching. This project is so beginner friendly that you could probably complete it in less than an hour. So not only would it be a great Valentine's Day gift, but also a great last minute gift. You've really got no excuses at this point to not embroider these. I've even linked everything that you need in the description of this video. Another really cute touch to these shoes could be adding initials or an anniversary date to the backs of the shoes on the spines, but that's if you want to be a little bit extra. You don't have to do that. And in this last video, I'm going to be showing you how to embroider some florals onto some jeans or jean shorts. This might be my favorite Valentine's Day embroidery tutorial because you can customize this design with florals that might be really significant to the special someone in your life. First of all, you're going to need a pair of jeans, preferably a thick, non-stretchy pair because thicker denim takes embroidery much better than jegging material. Next, you'll need this Dritz dual-purpose disappearing ink pen. I'll have this and all the other supplies I use in the video linked in the description below. I used Lovey Mag thread for this project, which is one of the cheaper, good quality threads that I recommend to beginners. Then to make this project easier, you could use a 6-inch embroidery hoop to stabilize the fabric while you embroider. These are the needles that I use for almost every embroidery project I do, and I'll be using the longest ones in the pack for these jeans. So all of these supplies are essential for this pocket embroidery project, except for the hoop. This step isn't necessary, especially if you're using jeans without stretch, but I'll show you how to pop the hoop onto the jeans anyway in case you do want to use this method. For the first step, you're going to outline the larger flowers. I don't recommend drawing everything out at once since this gives you a bit of freedom with the design. So just go ahead and sketch out the 5 petals on each flower. I made the petals a little bit too big on the first flower, but the magic of this pen means it doesn't matter since the ink will disappear when it comes into contact with water. I like putting the second flower a little below the first to add a bit of dimension to the design. I'm going to thread my white embroidery floss to fill these flowers in, and I forgot to include these little scissors in the supply list, but any scissors will do. I just love these because they're small and sharp, which makes them perfect for embroidery projects. I'm using all 6 strands of this white floss because I want the flowers to be quite puffy, almost 3D. Remember to double knot the end of your thread before stitching. The stitch for the flowers is quite simple. It's just a satin stitch back and forth until each petal is full. You can go from the middle to the outer edges of the petals or from the outer edge towards the inner area. I actually like to do both. It can get a little tricky to pull the needle through the middle of the flower once you get towards the end, since there will be quite a large build-up of thread there. You just might have to use your muscles a little bit. To tie off your thread, you need to loop it through the back stitches twice, and on the second go around, make a knot and then make another knot. This is a really foolproof way to make sure that your thread stays secure. Next, we're going to move on to the lavender stems. I like to put one on the right and two on the left, and then I make them kind of varying heights. I just draw the stems out for these, but you could also sketch out the little lavender buds. I'll be going in with this green, and I'm only going to be using 2 strands of this embroidery floss. This is just to make the stems look a little bit more delicate. I'm just using a really basic back stitch for the stems, and then you'll also see that I am doing the stems of the larger white flowers with the same green. It's also quite important to make sure that you go below the line of where the top of the pocket will sit on the jeans. This is just going to give the illusion that the flowers are really growing out of the pocket if you can't see the bottom of the stems. If you don't have a big clump of back stitches to tie off and secure your thread onto, you can always just use what's already inside the jean, like this hem that I'm using to tie off my stitches. I'm going to go in with this lavender purple colour. It's kind of a bluey purple, and I'm going to do some lazy daisy stitches that kind of grow upwards. You'll see what I mean. So for a lazy daisy stitch, you're going to stick your needle up through the fabric near the stem, and then you're going to stick it right back through, down through the fabric, near that spot where you pulled it up through the fabric. But don't pull the thread taut, you have to leave a little loop there. And then about 1 centimeter away from the area where you've created that loop, stick the needle back up through the fabric and then loop the needle through that loop that you left. This is going to create a lazy daisy stitch, and all you have to do after that is make the anchor stitch. My tip for great lazy daisy stitches is not to make them too tight. They're supposed to be a little bit fluffy, a little bit loose. When you make them too tight, it's almost hard to even tell that they're a lazy daisy stitch. You need to be able to see the 2 sides of the loop on either side of the anchor, and you get this kind of lavender looking flower. Continue this for the other 2 stems that you did, and you should have something that looks like this. Now we're going to go in and plot where our sunflowers are going to be. I like to draw a circle for where the middle of the sunflower will be, so then I can work the petals around that. Gonna go in with this kind of burnt yellow for the sunflowers. Again, I'm using all 6 strands of embroidery floss for the sunflower petals. For the sunflowers, I like to make 4 initial stitches around the center of the flower in the 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock positions. Then I go back in and make 4 more stitches between each of those stitches. So 1 stitch between 9 and 12 o'clock, 1 stitch between 12 and 3 o'clock, etc. And then I go back in and make 1 stitch between those stitches. You'll see what I mean. In total, it's 16 stitches. I also find it easier to work from the outside in when I'm doing these stitches usually. By doing 16 smaller stitches like this, it makes the sunflower appear quite full, and I really love the effect that it gives. You should be left with something like this after you're done with your sunflower petals. We're also going to be using this yellow for the pollen of the white flowers we did earlier. You're just going to want to do 1 French knot in the center of each white flower. For the French knot, pull your needle up through the middle of the white flower. Wrap your thread around it twice. Keep that thread taut as you pull it back through the white flower. The secret to great French knots is making sure you keep tension on the thread as you pull it through. Just keeps them really neat and tidy. After you're finished with your sunflowers, you should have something that looks like this. Then we're going to go in and fill in the center of the sunflowers with a brown thread. To do this, we're going to make about 6 French knots in the center of each sunflower. Wrap your thread around the needle twice before pulling it back through the fabric, and make sure to keep the tension on the thread to make sure your French knots are nice and tidy. We're going to go back in with 2 strands of the same green for the stems of those sunflowers. Again, make sure that you stitch below the line of the top of the jean pocket, just to give the illusion that they're really growing out of the pocket. Next, we're moving on to just some little filler stitches. I'm going in with the white floss and making a couple of French knots in some of the empty areas on the design. These kind of remind me of smaller, like baby flowers growing, and I just like to pop them in spots where it looks like there should be something. So I just made 8 French knot stitches, and then we'll go in with a lighter green for the stem of these. And I just used all 6 strands of thread for the stem on these white French knots. I think by varying the colors of the stems, it really gives a bit of dimension to the whole design. Okay, now we're on to our finishing touches. We're just going to embroider a couple of vines and leaves on the pocket of the jean. I'm gonna go back in with the 2 strands of that darker green. I'm doing a bit of couch stitching here, which basically just means I'm adding a bend to the stitch by sticking the needle up through the fabric and couching the stitch in a specific area to make it appear like it's growing in a bend. I used all 6 strands of the darker green for the vine leaves, and then I went back in and added a couple of smaller white French knots onto these vines. Now I'm going to use this mist spray bottle to remove all of the ink from the Dritz disappearing pen. You can also just do this underneath a tap in your kitchen or bathroom, but I really like this mist bottle. I feel like it works really well and it doesn't get the fabric too wet. And there you have it, a finished pair of embroidered jeans. And those are all the beginner-friendly tutorials I have for you today. I hope that you found this video helpful and that maybe you have enough confidence to try one of these tutorials at home and perhaps make a handmade Valentine's Day gift this year. If you did find this video helpful, please leave me a like and consider subscribing to this channel. I make a lot of tutorial style content as well as a lot of small business related content. So if that sounds like it might be up your alley, then I would definitely consider subscribing to this channel. Thanks so much for watching, especially if you've gotten to the end. And I will see you guys in my next video.